Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Now this week's video is all about three Voigtlander 6x9 folding cameras, the ones that I have in my collection. That's the Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF. They're both rangefinder cameras, and this camera, the Bessa 1, which was given to me by my brother. This is a 6x9 camera, same size negatives as the other two, but this one doesn't have a rangefinder. It uses scale focus. Now if you want to see a review on the Bessa 2 or the Bessa RF and both cameras compared and lots of sample images, just go to the playlist on my channel and look under classic cameras from the past, and you'll see two or three videos about those two cameras that I've already done. Now what I want to do is compare this camera, how it works, etc., against the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2, and just to see if this camera is actually worth buying. It might be a camera that actually suits you, suits your way of working, rather than paying out the rather expensive prices for the Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF. So it might be a camera that you could save some money if you wanted that 6x9 negative. So what I'm going to do is compare this camera, the various functions on it, how it works and how it differs from the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2. And then at the end of the video I'm going to actually show you a video where I went out with this camera, knowing that this camera, when I got it from my brother, it was been stuck in a cupboard for years. I've had it for a number of years, and knowing that it's not being serviced, and the only way that I can find out if it's working correctly is to actually go out and test it, and that's what I did. And you'll see in that video why it's so important to have these cameras from time to time CLA'd, cleaned, lubricated and adjusted, just to make sure that they're functioning as they should do. Because if they don't, what will happen is you'll go out with a camera like this, buy that and be excited about the big negative, come back, develop the film and find that there's something wrong, that the exposures are not accurate, the light readings you've taken. It's just the negatives are either overexposed or underexposed. It could be something to do with the shutter, it could be the iris, it could even be something to do with the focusing, that the focusing's not set correctly and working correctly. There are quite a lot of things that can go wrong, although they are beautifully built cameras, but they do need periodically servicing, as I say, to make sure that they work. And as I say, if you go out with them and they're not working correctly, you'll come back and develop the negatives and find that they're out of focus, that they're underexposed, overexposed, you've got light leaks, etc. And you'll end up not using these cameras. You'll put them in a cupboard and never use them again. In fact, it might put you off film for life. So that part of the video will show you the importance of having these old cameras serviced just to keep them running. So let's move on now, and I'll give you a brief history about them, and then we'll compare the camera. Then I'll show you the video I did on Ilkley Moor. Now I absolutely love the Voigtlander Bessa 6x9 folding camera range. They're built so beautifully, the engineering is superb on them. And if they were to be described as cars, then they would be, I'm sure, the Rolls Royce of folding cameras. The Bessa 2 on the far left, in mint condition, is going to cost you anywhere from £800 to £1,400 with a colour Helia lens. The Bessa RF in the middle, a mint condition one, is going to cost you £500 or £600. But the Bessa 1 on the right, you can pick these up from less than £100 in very good condition. Now, the Bessas are built to such a quality that I've never had a Voigtlander Bessa camera with a bad bellows. The bellows are absolutely superb on these cameras. The optics on the cameras are also wonderful. As I say, on the Bessa 2 on the left comes with this colour Helia lens. The Bessa RF comes with this lens. It's an uncoated Helia lens, and the Bessa 1 on this model comes with a colour scope lens. Now looking at the cameras from the left to the right, the Bessa 2 was built from 1950 up to 1956, the Bessa RF from 1936 up to 1951, and the Bessa 1 from 1951 up to 1956. Now, over that period of time, there were literally thousands of these cameras sold, and even today you can pick these cameras up in good working condition. And to me, that's a testament to the original build quality of these cameras. The only thing that you might have to have done is the shutters CLA'd, cleaned, lubricated and adjusted, just to make sure that the shutter speeds are running accurately. So that's something that you might have to build into the actual cost after you've bought the cameras. Now in this video I'm going to compare the much cheaper non-rangefinder Bessa 1 camera with the true rangefinder cameras, the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2. They are true rangefinder cameras. The rangefinder is coupled to the focusing, so when you move the focusing knob, the bellows move in and out until the rangefinder is correctly aligned and you've got the subject in focus. With the Bessa 1 you have to use scale focus, and that's where you estimate the subject distance from the camera, and you set that by rotating the front lens to that distance that you've guessed. Now I would recommend, if you're going to buy the Bessa 1, to buy an external rangefinder like this one. Now this is a Voigtlander rangefinder. You mount it onto the cold shoe of the camera, use the rangefinder to acquire the distance, and then transfer that distance by rotating the front lens to the distance scale on the outer part of the lens. Stop the lens down and you're much more likely to get sharper images working that way rather than just guessing the distances. So let's move on and take a closer look at the Bessa 1. I'll show you how to use the scale focus, how to advance the camera and set the shutter, how to load the camera, how to use the external rangefinder and transfer that setting to the lens. And also I'd like to talk about some of the features on the Bessa 1 that I wish the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2 had. In fact, I go as far as to say that if the Bessa 1 was a true rangefinder camera, it would be a better and easier camera to use than either the Bessa 2 or the Bessa RF. So let's take a look. Let's look at the Bessa 1 and see how it operates, the buttons and knobs on it, etc. But first of all, let's have a size comparison. This is the Bessa 2, and as you can see, the left to right measurement is exactly the same. The height of the cameras are basically the same, and the depth front to back is the same. Compare it to the Bessa RF. Now the Bessa RF is a little bit narrower at the top, but the height's the same, and the left to right measurement is basically exactly the same. So to all intents and purposes, they're exactly the same size. As regards weight, I think the Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF are a little bit heavier, but nothing to make a big difference. Now to open the camera, you press that little button there. It releases the catch to reveal the shutter lens and bellows. It's always important with these cameras is when you open them, don't let them suddenly open. Let them open slowly by using your hand, just to open them like that. You don't want to be putting any strain on these struts, and also by letting it open quickly, you can the bellows can cause a vacuum and pull the actual film away from the pressure plate. We don't want that to happen, so always let them open slowly. Always make sure as well that when you do open them that they're not set just like that, that you've got to make sure the struts are fully in position like that, so there's no gap there, and the door now will not close. So the bellows are correctly extended and the lens parallel to the film. To close the camera, you press that strut upwards, and the same at this side, and then it closes. So it's pretty easy to open and close. Now the top of the camera, I'll just zoom in a little bit. We've got a standard shutter release button, and it's nailed out for and it'll accept standard cable releases. We've got a little window there that's got an arrow in it, if you can see that. And I'll tell you what that is when I show you how to cock the shutter and fire the camera. The back, we've got this little nailed wheel, and that alters a mask in the viewfinder to correct for parallax error. Under normal circumstances, shooting 6x9, you'd have it set with the infinity mark showing. But if you're photographing things, you know, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, a lot closer to the camera, always set it to the 1 metre to 3 foot mark. And all that does, it alters a mask, as I say, in the viewfinder, and it corrects for that parallax error close up. It'll also do the same for 6 by 4.5 negatives. Use it exactly the same way. But for general use, leave it on the where the infinity mark's showing. We've got a standard cold shoe, and this is the wind-on knob. At the back, we've got the viewfinder window. It's small, like it is on a lot of the older cameras, but it's perfectly usable. It's very similar to the one on the Bessa RF and a little bit better than the one on the Bessa 2. We've got 2 red windows. You use the 2 red windows when you're shooting with the masking at 6 by 4.5 negatives, and you use that window where the cross is, the blind's closed now. When you're shooting 6 by 9 negatives, use that window. Now when you wind on the camera to the first frame or whatever frame you're going to, open that up, wind to the frame, and always make sure that blind's shut. It just stops light getting in through that red window. At the bottom of the camera, we've got tripod sockets there. They're the older, larger size, but you can put a reducer in like I've done on this side. That means you can use the modern tripods. At this side of the camera, we've got the leather strap, and there's 2 little catches. You press them and it opens the camera back. Now you can see that this camera's set for 6 by 9 negatives, and you'll get 8 shots on a 120 roll film. If you're shooting 6 by 4.5, you'll get double that amount, which is at 16. Now, all my cams didn't come with a mask, they've all been lost, but this is out of another 6 by 9 folding camera. It doesn't fit these, but it'll show you how it works. You place the mask inside the camera, you use the 2 red windows at the back to set the frame numbers, and that way you'll get 6 by 4.5 negatives. But as I say, I can't do that because I haven't got the mask. To load the camera, it's easy. You just lift that cover up, push the film into that, get hold of the leader, pull it across until it lines up, until you line it up with a slot in the take-up spool, and then once you've done that, push it in and then start winding the film on. Once you're happy that the film's been caught on the take-up spool, you don't have to use the start marks on these cameras because you use the red window. Just close the back, open that blind, and then keep on winding until you come to frame number 1, and then close the blind. Now, when you're using this camera, obviously it'll have to be open. Cock the shutter, and now this little window is showing me now with the arrow pointing towards the shutter button that this frame is ready to be exposed. Once I take the shot, the arrow moves and it's pointed towards the wind on knob, and it's telling me that I have to wind onto the next frame. So I open the window again and then wind on to say number 2. So wind on, if you hear a little click, you'll see the arrow has moved now and it's pointing towards the shutter button, and it's telling me now that this frame has not been exposed. So it's a great feature of that, because with the Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF, when you wind on to number 1 and take the shot, if say an hour or 2 later you want to take another photograph, sometimes you forget whether you've wound on or not, and there's nothing to prevent you from doing that. This camera will tell you whether you've exposed that frame or not, so it's a great feature is that. Now when we look at the lens and the shutter on this camera, let's see if that's focusing okay. This is the lever for altering the apertures. They're running on this camera from f3.5 up to f22, and you align them with this little marker there, that's on f8, and then the shutter speeds on this camera run from B to 1/400th of a second, and you just move that outer dial. So that's 1 second. Wind the camera on, cock the shutter, and then we go to say 1/5 of a second, wind it on, cock the shutter, So that's how you fire the shutter. And then with this camera, where it differs from the Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF is the fact that you don't have a rangefinder. You have to use scale focus. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can guesstimate the distance or use the external rangefinder that mounts on the camera hot shoe, like this one, and that mounts onto the hot shoe on the camera like that. And at the back of the rangefinder you'll see it's got a distance scale, and you move that until the rangefinder, the images come together, and then you take that distance from the back of this to the lens, and the distance is then set on this lens. So let's say it was 20 feet, we would set this to 20 feet, or if you were that good you could guesstimate at 20 feet, and we're ready to take the photograph. I would always recommend getting the external rangefinder, because a lot of the times you're probably not going to be estimating your lens to subject distance correctly. This way you're likely to get more keepers, as I might say. One thing to keep in mind is that this scale is set on this camera for, I think it's this side, no it's there, it's set to feet. Always make sure that your rangefinder you buy is also set to feet, otherwise they're not going to register. It's no use having a rangefinder that's at meters and a lens calibration that's at feet, so make sure they both match up. Now there are two other ways to set focus using these type of cameras, where you not going to use a rangefinder, or you don't have one, or you're not that good at estimating the distance from the camera to the subject and setting it on the lens. The other two ways are a zone focusing. That's where you set a zone of focus using a given aperture, knowing that anything that falls within that zone is going to be in what we call acceptable focus. And then there's the other way called infinity focus. Then this is where we get the maximum depth of field, again a given aperture, from foreground to infinity. And I'll show you how to set that on this camera. Just zoom in a little bit. Now we can see on the lens we've got the aperture scale that runs around the lens, and we've got the triangle, that's a datum point. So the aperture is mirrored left to right. Now if we're going to use infinity focus, we would set the infinity mark, you can see that now it's lined up with a triangle, to a given aperture, let's say f11, and we would move the infinity mark to f11, which is there, and then we would read the other side of the lens, how much depth of field we've got in the foreground. And if we look at f11 on this, we can see roughly from 15 feet to infinity will be in focus. So that's using the infinity focus. To use scale focus, let's say we want a zone of focus from around about 9 feet to 20 feet. Again using say f11, we would set the 20 feet mark, 20 foot mark, to f11, line it up with the f11 there, and then read from the other side the zone of focus. And if we look at the other side, you can see that we've got roughly from f11, it's round about 9 feet, 8 to 9 feet to 20 feet, and that would be your zone of focus. Obviously if you alter the aperture, it's going to alter the zone of focus. So to use zone of focus, you need to keep the lens well stopped down. So that's another two ways to focus these cameras. As I say, if you're not good at guesstimating distances or using a rangefinder. In this video that I'm going to show you, when I went out with the camera, you'll see that I used the infinity focus to get the maximum depth of field at a given aperture. So that's two other ways with these cameras to set focus, and you'll find that out of all of the focusing methods, probably the best way, if the rangefinder is accurate, is to use a rangefinder. The second best way, I think, is to use the infinity if you're doing infinity focus, if you're doing landscapes. And the other one, if zone focusing, is great if you're doing like street photography. You know that if anybody walks within that zone of focus that you've set, that they're going to be in what we call acceptable focus. So all in all, it's a very, very easy camera to use. It's very solidly made. The shutter on this, the lens, the iris and things like that. I know this camera has never been serviced for a number of years now, so that's why I'm going to show in the video why it's important to get these cameras serviced from time to time. And as you'll see in that video, the problems that you can get. Now the features on this camera that I wish the Bessa, just zoom out a bit, the Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF had, and this is this mechanism where you wind the film on, it clicks and it tells you when the frame is ready to be exposed, and then you click again and it moves, as I say, that way, pointing to those round knob, and that's telling me that that frame has actually been exposed. That's it doesn't happen with the other two cameras, and I wish it did. And the other thing I like about this camera, it's got a standard shutter button at the top. It just feels more natural to use. On the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2, I'll just show you quickly, they have a button, and the button's there. And every function, and using this camera, other than the wind on, everything has to be done with this left hand, where it's more natural on the Bessa 1 to be able to wind on at this side and press the shutter button there. So I wish it had that feature. And the other feature that those two don't have and this has is this this ability to alter the mask in the viewfinder to account for that parallax error when you get close in. So those are the three things. As I say, I think if this camera had been a rangefinder camera and it had these features, it'd have been a lot easier camera in some respect to use than the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2. So let's move on now and watch me making a mess of some of the pictures that I took with this unserviced Bessa 1 camera. Here we are on Ilkley Moor. This is the cow and calf rocks. That's the cow and that's the calf. It's a beautiful still morning. So I'm just going to have a little walk about with the Bessa 1. I've loaded the camera with Ilford FP4 and I'm going to develop it in diaphine. So I'm going to rate it at 250 ISO, but I'm also going to use a yellow filter which will take a stop of light, so that brings the actual film rating down to 125 ISO. That's what I'm going to set it to compensate for the yellow filter. So have a little walk about, see what I can find and test this this Bessa 1 out. So this is my first shot. I love the texture in this rock here. I'm not going to get all the rock in, probably half of it. Use the camera in the vertical format. I'm going to fit the yellow filter, which is fixed into the hood, the lens hood, and place that, so push on filter onto the camera, and then use the rangefinder to give me the distance. And that's saying, just see that there, just above 60 feet, and then set that on the lens, so just above 60 feet. So there's a 60 foot mark, and then set it to that triangle. Shutter's cocked. I've taken the light reading, and the light reading is 60th of a second at f11. Well, this camera I can only set 50th, but that's what I'm going to use, so I'll take the shot now. And that's the first shot. Now the thing with this camera is I cannot take another photograph and double expose, because the camera will not allow me to fire the shutter until I wind on and hear a little click. There you go. That means now I can wind the film on using the window at the back. So this is awkward, all one-handed. So I have to put the GoPro down a sec. Right, so I'm going to wind on now until I come to number 2. You might not be able to see this in the video. And there's number 2. Close this to stop light getting in, and now I can fire the shutter. So it's just a safety precaution with this camera, as I showed you looking around the cameras. With this camera, you know that when you've taken the shot, because there's an arrow there, that's telling me that the camera's wound on now, that little arrow. When I take the photograph, that arrow faces upwards, and that shows me that I need to wind on, but it won't allow me to press the shutter. So you don't have to worry about double exposing with the camera. So we'll move on. Now as I zoom into this picture, we can see there's something just not right. I set the rangefinder, which I know is accurate, and yet the rock is totally out of focus. So it could have been a user error. Just carry it on and see if it happens again. The picture, I'm going to try and get the rock in the foreground and the Cow and Calf Hotel on the horizon in the picture. I've used the rangefinder, set up the distance, and I'm focusing round about there on the big rock, and then going to use the f11 aperture again. I've just taken the light reading, and it's 30th of a second. So I'm going to fit the yellow filter on again. Just push on filter. There we go, pushed on. And look at the rangefinder, see what it's telling me. It's near enough 20 feet. So I'm going to set the distance to 20 feet on the lens. There's the little triangle there, and then set the distance to 20 feet. The lens has stopped down to f11, and the shutter speed wants to be a 30th. I can't use a 30th, I'll have to use 25th of a second. It's the way these old shutters work. And then cock the shutter and take the image quick. That's it, got that just before the sun came out. So we'll just see how the Bessa performs, or the scope of lens performs shooting into the light. Hopefully I just caught that in time, it just came a little bit brighter. So see how we go. Right, I'll move on and take the next picture. Now looking at the big rock in the foreground and the grass, which is all out of focus, and yet it shouldn't be, because I was well stopped down with the lens. The rangefinder gave me the distance around about 20 feet, and we can see that the Cow and Calf Hotel in the background is in focus. It should have been the other way around, so it's telling me again that there's something wrong with the calibration of the lens when we rotate it to the distance. Right, another image with this path, which will start at the bottom left hand corner and work its way around, and then we see the path at the top. Now for this picture, I've focused roughly a quarter into the picture, and then I'm going to stop the lens down to f16 to make sure I get enough depth of field to get the foreground in focus and the background, hopefully. I've taken a light meter reading, the reading saying 15th of a second, if you can see that, at f16. So I've set that on the lens. It's 10th of a second on this camera, not 15th, and I'm set to f16. Yellow filter, same as before. So I'm just going to maybe wait until somebody maybe walking in that top path at the top. But I don't want the sun to come fully out, so I'll just see what happens with this shot. Right, I just got the shot, these two walkers coming down, just add a little bit more interest, and the sun's really coming out now, so we'll move on. So as we zoom into this picture, you can see that I focused, or tried to focus, just beyond that small rock in the foreground, and yet I really haven't got anything in focus, and I was at f16. So it's telling me that there is something wrong with the calibration of that front element when I'm setting the distance. So I'm going to take a picture of this winding path going up to the old quarry, and this time I'm going to use a different way to focus. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to use the infinity focus. So I've got the aperture set to f16, and now I'm going to use the infinity mark on the lens, which is there, just there, and set that to f16 on the lens. And that means at f16 everything from roughly about 10 feet to infinity should be in focus. Now I've taken a light reading. The exposure is, let's have a little look. I've forgotten it again. The exposure is 60th of a second of f16. So on this camera it's going to have to be 50th. So I'll set the shutter speed to 50th. So I'm set to 50th of a second. Double check f16, and got the hyperfocal distance with the infinity mark on the lens. So I'll take the shot, and hopefully this is going to work out. I've got the yellow filter fitted as well. So here we go. Take the shot. I didn't take the shot then. There were some people walking up. You can just see them now moving across, and I caught them just at the top of the path going up, and I just thought it'd make a slightly more interesting picture with somebody in the distance. So I just paused taking a picture because I saw them coming up, and waited till I got them in the photograph. Right, move on. Well, at least in this picture I've got something in focus, although I'd set the infinity mark to f16, and the scale was telling me that everything from 10 feet to infinity would be in focus. Well, there's no way that the foreground is stretching from 10 feet to infinity. The foreground goes out of focus a lot more than what it should do. So that's an indication that even using infinity focus, that the calibration on that front element is not working as it should do. So we've got the same setup here. Just going to fit the yellow filter. As I said, these are push-on filters, they just push on. I've taken the light reading, and it's for this scene 15th of a second at f16, and I'm not going to use the rangefinder. Again, I'm going to use the infinity focus. The exposure is 15th of a second, which is 10th on this camera, at f16. So I've got the aperture set to f16, and I'm going to use the infinity mark at the f16 on the scale here, and that means, again as before, I've got depth of field running from round about 10 feet to infinity. So hopefully I'm going to get everything in focus. I might just wait till some people maybe fill that gap as they're coming up to the quarry, see if I've got enough patience. So you can see there are different ways that you can actually focus the camera. You can use the hot shoe mounted rangefinder. If you're good at guessing distances, you can do that. You can use the infinity focus that I've just used, or you can use scale focus, where you can set a predetermined depth of field. So I've got that set to infinity, and then just wait, as I say, if someone will walk into that gap. It might not happen, but just wait and see. Now this picture is probably the best of the bunch, and I think I got away with that because I haven't got anything really prominent in the foreground. Although when we zoom into the rocks in the foreground, they are out of focus, and I feel with the amount of depth of field at f16 they should have been in focus. I'm pleased that I waited for the person to walk into the picture. it just gives you an idea of the size of these rocks to the entrance of the quarry. Without a person in the picture, as we see here, there's just no scale, but with a person in, it just gives you a good idea the size of these rocks. Now, I'm also very pleased the way Diafine has coped with the massive dynamic range here. I've got detail in the sky and I've got detail in the deepest shadows. So all in all, this is probably the best picture of the day. So for this picture, I'm going to focus with the rangefinder on that name that says Charles, and get the Calf Hotel in the distance, hopefully in the picture. And I'm just waiting now until the sun gets a little bit shielded by some cloud. This is why I've had to use a rangefinder to give me that distance rather than guessing it. Again, I've got yellow filter and I've set the distance to actually 10 feet, which we can see there. It's set to 10 feet on the distance scale. The exposure is 60th of a second f11, although I keep saying on this camera it's 50th. And as I say, I'll just wait now till the sun goes slightly in. You can see at the back we've got 10 feet on the scale. We'll just see if that's in focus. I've just got to wait now until the sun actually goes behind the cloud a little bit. It's just a little bit bright. Now, I double checked the rangefinder on this, and the word Charles was definitely in focus, and yet it's out of focus when I set it on the lens. So yet again, another failure, but I'm learning a lot from this when I've seen these pictures, and I know now that this camera does need a service and recalibration. So I've seen my this is a 7 shot. I like the way the branches are hanging down. I've taken a light reading. It's a 125 at f16. So on this camera, as I say, it'll be 100th of a second, and I'm going to use the infinity focus, and I'm going to try and get myself in the picture using the self timer on this camera. So I think it runs for about 10 seconds, so I'm going to take the shot now and then get moving. That should have done it. Go back and have a little look. That's something I've never tested on this camera. See if the self timer's working. Yeah, it's worked, so got myself in the picture. Right, move on and find something for the last shot. It's good to know that the self timer works on this camera. In fact, everything works apart from the focusing. But I like the way the scope of lens captures the tones and the intricate details in the picture. It's a pity they weren't sharp, because I would have got some really good pictures. So I can confirm that the scope of lens, even looking at these pictures, is an excellent optic to have on your camera. So I've just got those people in the photograph, got these grasses in, and I've got this stone pillar in the photograph. The exposure was 250th of a second at f16. This is with the yellow filter, so I had to set it to 200th on this camera to f16 and use the infinity focus. So that's the last photograph. You only get 8 shots on the 6x9. I get home and develop them and see how they've turned out. You're always going to make mistakes. I think I did make a mistake in the quarry part where I took a meter reading and I used an instant light reading and had the meter set to a spot metering. So you do make mistakes, but hopefully when you make mistakes you learn from them. But you know, there's that many things to think about when using these cameras. You know, it's not unusual to get something wrong now and then. And yet again the same problem with the depth of focus. Setting the infinity mark to f16, I should have had sharpness throughout the picture from 10 feet to infinity, and yet when we look at the foreground grasses, there's nothing in focus, it's just a mush. So at least when you buy you know, some of these old cameras and you use them for the first time, always go out and check them to see if everything's working okay. I know now by going out for a couple of hours with a camera that this camera is not working correctly. It needs to go in for a service, and it definitely needs the actual lens calibrating, so when they set the distances that they're accurate. The other thing that I'm pleased with is the FP4. When it's developed in diaphane, it produces some lovely tones, and that's also helped by the scope lens, which I think is an excellent optic. And using diaphane, as you can see in all the pictures, it's coped with the bright dynamic range of that day, and I've retained detail in the highlights and in the shadows. So you can learn from this video that going out with a new purchase, a new camera, vintage camera, that to go miles with it and shoot 4 or 5 rolls of film, to come back and find that they turn out like the pictures I've shown you in this video, you're going to be very, very disappointed. So it always pays you to test the cameras and just make sure they're working okay. And as I said in the beginning of the video, get the cameras CLA'd, get them set up so you have the confidence when you go out the next time that everything's going to be working as it should be. So as I say, that's it, the last picture. Go home and get the negative developed. They're not going to be any masterpieces, but it'll just show how this camera works and how you can use it when you're out with it. These cameras are really beautiful cameras to use if you want to learn photography, because you've got to do absolutely everything. You have to learn how to focus correctly, you have to learn how to use scale focus, infinity focus. You have to remember a lot of things with these cameras to make sure you get the picture, and it's a great learning curve when you're first starting into film, and as I say, it does make you slow you down and make you think about the pictures that you're taking. So I highly recommend using these folding cameras. They are really, really fun to use, but as I say, not only that, they're a great learning tool. So I'll get back, develop the negatives, and hopefully I've got something to show you, and let's see how good the colour scope R lens is. I hope you enjoyed this video and it's helped you to make the choice on what Bessa 6x9 a folding camera that you might be thinking of buying. The Bessa 1 is a great camera. The Bessa 2 and the Bessa RF are better in the respect that they have a rangefinder, but that comes at a cost. Those cameras, depending on what type of lens you get with them, will cost you a lot more than this camera. This camera, when it's set up right, will produce results nearly as good as those, and you'll still get those big 6x9 negatives. I haven't shown you obviously the full range of Voigtlander 6x9 folding cameras. There were other models in the late 20s when they first came out, but I couldn't show you them simply because I don't have them. But I think the Bessa 1, the Bessa RF and the Bessa 2 are probably the best of that series. So if you're looking for a 6x9 folding camera, maybe look at these 3 models to see which one you might prefer. Now, as you saw in the video, the importance of having your cameras serviced. I went out and I tested the camera, and by doing that I found out that there was something wrong with the focusing on this camera. I knew the rangefinder was correct because I've tested that, and when I set the rangefinder distance on the front scale on this, obviously it wasn't setting the correct distance on this lens, so this needs to be calibrated. So this camera is going to have to go in for a service to make sure when I go out it works correctly. And I know that these cameras can produce some really nice images, and this camera can. Put this rangefinder on it and you've basically got yourself a rangefinder camera at a lot cheaper cost than buying the Bessa 2 or the Bessa RF. So that is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like, a thumbs up. Better still, subscribe to my channel, and as I always say, stay safe, and I'll see you all in the next video.